All right, well, we will get started here. My name is Dan Meyer. I'm the Chief of Police with the Whitewater Police Department. Also with me is Ryan Dion, Assistant Chief at the Whitewater Police Department. John Wydell's our city manager. He's not here with us tonight, but he is one of the three that is very in the know on this topic. So with that, we will get rolling into our presentation here. So just starting, I guess at the outset, we have a referendum question on the ballot, April 1st. We're gonna give kind of a broad overview and then provide time at the end here to answer any public questions that may come up. But at a 40,000 foot view, the reason that we are going to referendum is we have an increasing number of service calls, an increasing complexity to those calls, but no addition in staff to help handle those calls. So again, at that high level view, that's the reason we're here, but we're gonna get into the meat of that here moving forward. And I will start, if you wanna can you just advance that one ahead?
You want,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted, yeah, because
Okay, perfect. So on the police department side, I've got a graphic here that shows on the left side, shows our call volume from 2010 through 2024. That has increased 90% in that time, from roughly 7,500 calls in 2010 to 14,245 last year in 2024. And as I mentioned before, our sworn staffing has increased exactly 0 in that time. The last time we added staff was 2008. We had a organizational and workload study that was done fall of last year. One of the things that they found is we have increasing, or certain types of calls are increasing faster than other types. Some of those things are domestic violence cases, weapons calls, reckless driving, and there's one additional one that's escaping me right now. Mental health calls. So the one thing other than maybe reckless driving that those calls have in common is that they're very time consuming calls. So while they may just show up as one call for service of those 14,000 some in 2024, they have they measure much bigger in terms of our actual staff time responding to them. So like I said, we've had 0 increases in staff, but roughly double the amount of calls. That has 2 impacts on us. The first one being we increase our overtime to account for that. And the second one being that we become much more reactive in our policing style. So as we move forward, I'm just gonna start off with the overtime. From 2014 through 2023, this graph shows how our overtime has increased in that time, roughly 80% over that span. So 2 outcomes of that. One is it's expensive. We're paying people time and a half to work overtime. But probably the most important thing is it's burning our staff that we do have. It's burning them out. We're talking overtime that's not, hey, sign up for this if you want it, but we're not gonna require you to work it. It's not like that. It's, hey, we are essentially ordering people to work not 8.25 hours that they normally do, but a 12-hour, a 14-hour shift. And it's happening on a more and more consistent basis, just to cover our minimum staffing. And then moving into our ability to proactively police and how this is making us more reactive. This is just a slide. I'm going to touch on it briefly. It's called the rule of 60. This is a well-known theorem, I guess, in law enforcement, stating that 60% of an officer's time, generally speaking, should be spent on direct call response. And that can include going to the call, speaking with complainants or dealing with whatever the issue is, and then documenting the call, whether it may be an arrest, it may be just coming up with a safety plan, it may be mediation, whatever the issue is, finishing up and documenting that call. The other 40% of the time should be devoted to proactive activities, and that can range from proactive traffic control to doing business checks, business walkthroughs, to just community engagement efforts, meetings, things like that. So 40% of our time should be devoted to that. So how much of our time is actually devoted to that? That's a really difficult thing to measure because one of the limitations of our software and honestly, most police department software is I can't tell you second for second what every single one of our officers is doing on a daily basis because yeah, I can tell you how long they're on a call, but then coming back here and documenting, we don't have them like punch in, I'm documenting my call, punch out. So it's a limitation in our data, but what I can do is look at some of our best measures of proactive activity. One of those being traffic stops. So the image that I have here on the left side of the screen has that same call volume data with this orange line overlaid with a bar chart of our annual traffic stops department-wide. And what you'll see is that we've had a dramatic drop off in traffic stops that coincides with the rise in that call volume. So essentially that diversion in those two data points reflects as plainly as I can show you how we've become more reactive and less proactive. So just to take the traffic stops as an example of this, why is that a big deal? Truly, traffic stops are the backbone of policing. It's what allow us to find intoxicated drivers. It helps us to find people with warrants. And it helps us to find people that are carrying drugs on them. But also positive things like, hey, you got a traffic, you got a brake light out, you got a tail light out, which can be, can help us to avoid traffic crashes and just be a more positive interaction. But it's not just traffic, it's that visibility in the community. For anybody that lives in the city, especially on the outskirts of the city, I would hazard a guess that there's been times recently when you're like, when is the last time I just saw an officer patrolling or walking or getting out and saying, hey, how's it going? What kind of issues are you seeing? How can we better serve you? Maintaining those positive relationships. Talk about traffic enforcement and that community engagement. But, a few other things that most people wouldn't maybe think about, providing that time for officers to train on duty. We have a drone team and all of our drone operators are required to train 4 hours a month to maintain their certification. So lately they haven't been able to do that. So they're coming to us saying, look, I just could not stay. I couldn't keep up and I did not get those hours done. So we either have to then keep them on overtime just to train, or we have to completely recertify them if that's not doable for them to stay on overtime. Decreasing response times. Obviously, if officers are out busy on a call, working through that, they are not going to respond to a new call as quickly as they would had they been freely available on the road, either driving or whether it's sitting, doing traffic enforcement, just meeting with people, but nothing that they had to be doing. Those people can immediately go respond directly. And then finally, allowing for thorough investigation and follow-up. I can tell you with staff that have been hit hard with very major cases, up to and including a homicide, there are certain things that just are not going to take precedence. Some of these low-level frauds, some of the cases that before we've put some effort into finding a resolution, they just don't have time for that. So increasingly, we're just not able to close out some of these calls that we once would be able to. So that's the downside of us becoming more reactive. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Chief Dion here, and he's going to talk through the fire department issues.
Thanks, Chief. So, again, Assistant Chief Ryan Dion, Whitewater Fire and EMS. So I'll kind of take you through the fire department side of this. Graph here on your left side of your screen, depicting 2012 and 2024. So in that amount of time, we've seen a 48% increase in calls for service. So you may remember the referendum in 2022 where we started having full-time staffing at our fire station. So we started to recognize that need in the early 2020s, that the incoming call volume and the demand was outpacing the folks that we had. So, from 1871 up through 2023, we operated on that paid on call or volunteer model, as people think. So as I move through my slides here and you hear the word paid on call, you can equate that to the volunteer, or what you would picture as a volunteer. They're not a full-time employee. They work at ABC Incorporated. They're at home cutting their grass. They're doing whatever it is they do. And a pager, a radio, whatever that they carry goes off as a demand need. We need help now. And those people respond to whatever incident there might be to mitigate it. So calls are steadily increasing. With that, we've had an 82% decrease in paid on call response. So after the 2022 referendum, the department we created was a combination department. We have some full-time people and we have some of these part-time or paid on call people, and it's about a 50-50 split. So we have 15 full-time employees and we typically float from between 16 and 18, maybe up as high as 20. Right now we're at 16 part-time or paid on call people. Our firefighters work 24-hour shifts. 3 shifts, 4 people per shift, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So in 2012, we had just over 100 of these volunteers or paid on call people. Moving forward to 2024, we currently roster just under 20. Like I said, we have 16 of these paid on call folks, and they are very, very much an integral part of our response plan. Being that we only have 4 people on duty every day, we need at least 2 people to staff an ambulance. So a call comes in, 2 people respond, subsequent call comes in, our last 2 people respond, and we're out of staffing. So 1 EMS call cuts our available on-duty staffing by 50%. So this is what we're trying to rectify and bolster the numbers. The paid on call folks that we have are good people. It's a time crunch, and this is not a Whitewater problem. It's not a state of Wisconsin problem. It is a nationwide problem. You know, open up the fire service trade magazines every month. There is another article about the paid on call service model is declining. What are we going to do? So I do want to reiterate that the part-time or paid on call people that we have are fantastic. They're trained, they're certified, their heart is in the right place. The service they provide is superlative. The issue is the ability to get them into the station. So when we put out the request, there's 2 reasons why that would happen to bring these paid on call people in. That the saturation dictates that, so there's more than 1 or 2 calls going on at one time, or complexity. The nature of the call is too much in that 4 people can't handle it. We don't fight a fire with 4 people. We don't go to a car accident with 4 people. We need help. So we rely on auto aid from our neighbors, but the core of it is we're asking for those part-time people, those paid on call people to respond in. So in January, my most recent set of metrics that I've extracted, January of 2025, we had 19 such requests for those paid on call people to respond into the station. I'm averaging 1.52 responders per request. And it is not because they don't want to do the work, it's just because there is a time crunch. And there's a lot of factors for this. A lot of households, both parents are working now. If one is off, they might have childcare responsibilities, kids in extracurricular sports, your full-time job. All of those things are making it difficult for people to be able to respond, to say nothing of the initial hour requirements that it takes to even earn your certifications, which for firefighter entry level, our state certified firefighter 1 and EMT basic, you're flirting with 2 semesters of work and just under 300 hours. So it becomes quite a bit. So why is this decline in paid on call service application becoming an issue? Again, it's not our paid on call people, it's the reliability of the paid on call service delivery, which is faltering nationwide. If we look at this graph here since bar graph. Since 2012, excuse me, there's been a 52% increase in overlapping calls for service, or what we consider or call in the field call concurrency. So that is, one call went out, two people are tied up, and a subsequent call has come in. In 2024, our call concurrency rate was about 20%, slightly over. So 1,965 calls for service that occurred in 2024, 20% of those had a simultaneous or a concurrency rate, which means we're out of people. So when the next emergency comes in, we're relying on paid on call people to respond and start mitigating it. So this is, I guess, the biggest overall picture that I can kind of show is the increase in demand coupled with the decrease in paid on call service delivery or reliability of that model. One of the issues, I wouldn't call it specific to Whitewater, it just applies to Whitewater, and there are many other communities in our area in the state that this would apply to, is we don't have a receiving facility right here in our city. So when you get sick and have to go to the hospital, we're driving out of the city, we're taking you to Fort Atkinson, possibly Mercy, possibly Aurora Lakeland, and this takes time. So from the time we get called till we get out the door, we're averaging about a minute and a half. In the city, travel time, we're averaging another 4 minutes or so, getting to you, stabilizing you, getting you packaged up, getting you in the ambulance, taking you to the hospital, dropping you off, giving you a report to the receiving facility staff, getting the ambulance put back together, getting back in it and driving back to Whitewater. This takes on average about 50 minutes to an hour and 5, as many as hour and 10. So that's the reason for such that higher concurrency rate, is because it takes quite a bit of time to get to and fro. So again, we have 4 people on duty, 1 EMS call comes out, we've reduced on-duty staffing by 50%. 20% of the time, an additional call is coming in, we're now out of people. And if that subsequent or second call is fire related, we're really in need of help. Again, we rely on auto aid, and we do have mutual aid agreements with our neighbors, but mutual aid is a request, not a demand. If that city or municipality or department is taxed and unable to provide, they're unable to provide.
All right, so I'll get into what is actually included in this referendum question in a minute. But one of the things that we want to hit on first is, why are we at the point where we're asking the public to consider a referendum? And I think in a world where we hear about so many different referendums, whether it's a municipality, a school district, whatever it may be, it gets to a point where we start having that thing in our mind, though, this is just an easy button solution to a problem, rather than really critically analyzing what the solution should be. I can tell you without hesitation, we have done everything in our power here to avoid this outcome going to referendum. One of the primary things we've done is seek out free resources. The first way we did that was applying for and receiving a federal grant. It's the COPS hiring grant. And that awarded us $375,000 for 3 officers over a 3-year period. $75,000 per officer year 1, $35,000 per officer year 2, $15,000 per officer year 3, which is fantastic. Amazing opportunity for us. The problem with it is, each of those officers, after, total benefit package, you're looking at about $120,000 or so. So even in year 1, the city is making up the difference of roughly $50,000 to $55,000 per officer. So we'll say $150,000 total. Our existing municipal budget simply cannot absorb that money. So if this referendum does not pass, we cannot take advantage of that free money, essentially, is what it comes down to. The second thing we've been doing in terms of free resources, we've been working closely with our elected officials. For the first time that I've worked here, we actually have, for the city of Whitewater, money that's earmarked in the federal budget. It's $85,000 for an immigration liaison position. And that's not under the police department umbrella, it'd be under the city umbrella. as a resource for both city staff, but also that immigrant population that we have here. So again, it's a huge opportunity. We won't know if that's officially approved through the federal budget until later this year. But again, us being creative to try to get, resources that are not tapping our taxpayers. Also, we have tapped into technology. So with that staff number really remaining constant from 2008 through 2024, on that graph I showed earlier, we've got to find ways to make the staff we do have more efficient. One of the ways we've done that is through our Flock automated license plate reader system. That is a system of cameras that we have in the city that will take a picture of every vehicle that passes it, as well as the license plate. Best way I can explain how it makes us more efficient is through a real incident. A couple of years ago, we had the Fort Community Credit Union was robbed. At that point, we had kind of a weak witness statement of a suspect vehicle. I'll just call it a black Ford pickup truck or black pickup truck. So what happens at that point is our staff now has to canvass the neighborhood, any businesses, any homes that may have like ring cameras or just surveillance systems in place. And ask the business owners, ask the property owners, hey, would you be willing to share that with us? And then, have anywhere from a couple hours to days worth of footage, depending on what that witness statement is. And we're reviewing that, like physically looking at it, speeding it up if we can to try to find a black pickup truck. All right, here's one. Great. So now we have a, conglomeration of pickup trucks that could be our suspect vehicle. However, we get to a point where, yep, we got this great profile shot of a pickup truck, but we don't have a license plate. So now we're doing things like posting it to social media and things like that. All that investigative effort, where with this Flock system, I could literally go to my computer, type in and show me every single black pickup truck that's passed a camera in the last, name it up to 30 days back. And it will show every single one of them, as well as the license plate associated with it. So just unbelievable how much more efficient that can make our staff. Another thing that we've done is we've entered an intergovernmental agreement with the city of Waukesha to use their forensic lab. In today's day and age, so many of our investigations involve computers or cell phones. What ends up happening is, for those that we have to analyze a cell phone, say, prior to this agreement, we'd send it off to an outside agency and we'd wait 4 to 6 months, sometimes longer, to get that phone back as well as the contents of the phone. Now, actually just a couple of weeks ago, our detective took that over to the forensic lab. He's trained in that now. He downloaded a phone in 7 minutes. So, in terms of efficiency, service delivery, it's hard to put a price on that. So those are great things. The problem is, they're not addressing the root issue, which is we just don't have enough people to address the vault. That Fitch and Associates staff study that we had done in the fall of 24, they recommended that we hired 8 sworn staff. Now, this referendum question doesn't go that far. It asks for 5 officers. We think we can do what we need to do with less than that recommendation. But again, with the overall goal here of being fiscally responsible. Again, our ideal is not to get to this point, but we just really don't have other options at this point to address the need. So on the note of fiscal responsibility, one of the things that I think is important to point out is out of the 604 municipalities in the state of Wisconsin, Whitewater has the 58th largest population, but it ranks 409th in per capita property tax levy. Obviously very low on the bottom third. So if this referendum passes, Whitewater is still going to be right about the very meat of the curve at 294 of that 604. So the way I see that is it's really not pushing us way to the edge of being overtaxing our residents, I guess is the best way I can put that. Is there anything else, I guess, finance director, anything else that you think
No, you just typically, you would see, everything kind of line up. Like 50th, a population, you would expect to see very similar, rankings for per capita. Property tax levy, net police spending, all of that, and we are significantly lower than most.
All right, and then to get into the meat of what's actually being considered with this referendum question. So it includes 5 police officers, 2 cross-trained firefighter EMTs, and 1 dispatcher, as well as all the necessary equipment to outfit those positions. In addition to that necessary equipment, there's $250,000 of capital. And what that is allocated for is getting us into a model where we are paying for some of those capital items like squad cars up front, rather than utilizing debt to do that. The estimate is that in the first 10 years, we're gonna save roughly $770,000 in debt service alone by moving to that model. Another note here, of those 5 police officers, our ideal scenario is to have one of those become a school resource officer. However, that's kind of contingent on reaching an agreement with the school district. If that doesn't happen, they'll remain a patrol officer until the time when that can happen. We see a need for it.
So on the fire department side of this, heard me discuss before that we actually have 3 shifts, A, B, and C, the firefighters working 24-hour shifts. But we still plan, and quite frankly, need to have some reliance on that paid on call service delivery model to help us meet our needs. We're gonna end up redeploying some of that money allocated for part-time pay to bring on another full-time person. So if approved, we're asking to fund 2 cross-trained firefighter EMTs or firefighter paramedics. And by doing that, we'll be able to reallocate some money in our existing budget to fund the 3rd. So we really sat down and scrutinized and said, how could we do this and how could we make it cost effective? So very similar to Chief Meyer, the fire department had a staffing study done recently. It was completed right around the 1st of the year. This year, ours was McMahon. This is all linked again on the referendum homepage. It'll take you to all these studies. Feel free to dive into it. They recommended we hire an additional 1 firefighter EMT per shift, and also move our part-time EMS chief and EMS service administrator from part-time to full-time. Those were their recommendations. Us looking at that, much like the police department did, we buckled down and said, what do we actually need? What can we get this done with? And this was the answer. We're gonna hold off on that recommendation or researching the fact of elevating that part-time position to full-time just yet, so we can really put the boots on the ground and get extra workers to answer these 911 calls.
Okay, so what is the actual ask in that question? It's for an additional just over $1.3 million that would raise that operating budget on an annual basis. So this is the actual question that's gonna show up on the ballot April 1st. And unfortunately, these are kind of just steeped in legalese, and that's just how these questions look on the ballot to make sure that it does, you know, if it passes, it does what needs to be done with it. So I'll just read this. Under state law, the increase in the levy of the city of Whitewater for the tax to be imposed for the next fiscal year 2026 is limited to 2.166% based on the city's best estimate, which results in a levy of $6,600,275. Shall the city of Whitewater be allowed to exceed this limit and increase the levy for the next fiscal year 2026 for the purpose of funding increased staffing and continuing to operate police and fire EMS services by a total of 18.29% based on the city's best estimate, which results in a levy of $7,906,057. And on an ongoing basis, include the increase of $1,305,782 for each fiscal year going forward. So all that to say, one of the primary distinctions with a referendum question, a municipal referendum question like this, as opposed to a school district referendum, is This is, if approved, that increase of 1.3 roughly million in the budget would go into perpetuity. And it would be a one-time lift in every year thereafter. Whereas some of the school district, referendums, it's got a time limit on it, and some of them will build 1 year to the next. This one is a one-time lift, and it would be into perpetuity. Okay, so, if the majority of residents vote yes, what will happen is, as we mentioned, we'll add those 5 additional full-time police officer positions, the 2 cross-trained firefighter EMTs, the dispatcher, which serves, our police, campus police, as well as fire EMS, which goes beyond the city, as well as that necessary equipment and that capital money to get us into that, that model where we're paying for things, the capital items up front. In that scenario where, the referendum passes, this is a look at what the total impact will be to the taxpayer. It's slightly different based on what county you live in. And this is for 100,000 of assessed property value, so, obviously, depending on what the value of a property's worth will impact the total, cost for an individual. But for the average property owner, it comes up to about $20 a month. So, I know the city manager likes to compare that to Netflix, which just went up to about $25 a month. This costs less than that for the services that we had mentioned. And then what happens if the majority vote no? It's not quite as simple as things are gonna stay the same, status quo. And the reason for that is we're not in a sustainable, we're not set up to be sustainable right now. One of the biggest concerns is losing people because they're getting burned out. So in the event it doesn't pass, we're gonna have to sit down with our common council and figure out what those services are that we can no longer provide. I don't wanna go too far down the rabbit hole on this one. But just as an example, for us, one of the things that I think would come up pretty early on, those non-emergent traffic crashes, probably an online reporting system, like you'd see in Milwaukee. Not something that's very common for a Whitewater-sized municipality. And certainly not something that helps us be a community-oriented department. But when you're weighing, burning out our staff and losing them versus continuing to provide that service, at some point you just have to make that decision. So, and there's a number of things that we would have to consider, but that will be the outcome rather than remaining status quo as we are today. And then just a little bit more information here on, election day is Tuesday, April 1st. In-person voting information here, March 18th through the 28th. And then the deadline for absentee ballot is March 28th by 5 p.m. And then election day polls are open 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. So ultimately, we're not here to try to get people to vote one way or another. We're simply here to educate people on what this decision entails. So we just want people to be informed so that they can vote whatever way they feel the vote needs to go. And then finally, for anybody that has further questions about this, we have at the link here a webpage devoted to this referendum. It's got all of the graphs and things that we've provided here today. Best way to get to this, if you just go into the Google bar, Whitewater 2025 referendum, you'll land right there, first one. And then secondly, if there are any more specific questions that anybody has, they can email those directly to www.2025referendum@whitewater-wi.gov. We've got 5 or 6 of us that are monitoring that all the time. So whoever is best tasked to, or best suited to answer those questions, they'll get routed to. And it's been within a day or two that we're getting answers out to people. So I really encourage people to use that as well, or just email me directly, where it needs to go. So that's what we have for our presentation. With that, we'll open it up to any questions that, whether online or in person.
Please
that
leave
may
the
be open. Sure.
You're good. Thank you.
Not a problem. Is there still anybody on? Is nobody on? Okay. So for those present, any questions that we can help?